All right, you guys, so we are having a discussion about the second episode of The Boys Cherry Bomb. This is a super fascinating episode, guys. There's a lot of things that I want you to think about, and I have some questions for you coming up. Welcome to the channel, especially if you are new here. So we are covering Amazon's The Boys, but we're covering it episode by episode. Listen, there's so much to get into with each episode. We're doing it this way, and we're not covering it season by season because there's a lot of deep diving to do. So stay with us because I have some questions for you about this episode and some things I want you to consider. And of course, if you're new here, consider hitting that subscribe button and joining the community. Now, let's jump right in. We're going to leave off from where we left off with episode 1, and we'll jump right into episode 2. So it's really fascinating, right? Because at this point now with episode 2, we're in the car and we know that Huey is completely freaking out because he thinks that he's killed Translucent. But we find out that Translucent is in fact not dead. And Huey and Butcher are on their way to meet someone. And they're actually going to meet who turns out to be my favorite character in the show so far. Having said that, I'm curious who your favorite character is so far. Who have you connected with in the show so far? And don't be ashamed to say if it's one of the 7. If it is, man. It's just connections are connections. But I really love Frenchie, and that's who they're on their way to meet. I love everything about Frenchie. I love his disposition. I love his accent. I love his mannerisms. And I really, really hope at some point we learn a lot more about his character and his backstory. So they go to meet Frenchie, and Billy comes in, and he's like, hey, Frenchie. And Frenchie's looking at him like, unless you're here to give me my 40 G's you owe me, then we don't have anything to talk about. Of course, Billy doesn't have the money, but he wants to recruit Frenchie to help do what he needs to do with Translucent, but Frenchie is resistant. But finally Frenchie is interested enough, and they go outside, and Frenchie finds that Translucent is in the trunk, and he's just like, oh, you got Translucent. That's Translucent in your trunk. That was the worst French accent that probably was ever done, and I apologize. But he finds out the Translucent's in the trunk, and now he's really hot. He's like, man, I don't want any part of this. Those guys are chipped. Vought is probably on their way right now. The 7's probably on their way right now. I don't want any part of it. Now, here's what I want you to think about, and I want to know if you agree with me here. Billy totally tricked Frenchie. That was wrong. Like, he did him wrong. Because I think that Billy knew that when he opened that trunk, Frenchie was screwed. Frenchie was already in. Because the moment he did that, Translucent had seen him. He knew what Frenchie looked like. So Frenchie couldn't just walk away. It'd be a death sentence. So Frenchie realizes that, okay, you're right, I'm screwed. He's seen me. So they take him downstairs, and they're really kind of trying to find a way to take this boy out. And, you know, they go through a whole bunch of things. They try and shoot him with a bullet. None of that works. He has diamond skin. You really can't penetrate the shell of his skin. They try to drill him. None of that works. So this next scene had me like crying. It was so funny. And that is the scene with A-Train visiting the kid that's terminal. Now, it's this kid's dying wish to see Translucent, but they send A-Train instead. And A-Train tries to get the kid pumped up about the fact that he's there, but the kid's just not having it. And it's hilarious when you look at how it's being tracked on social media, and you can see the emojis with the mad and sad and shocked faces at the fact that A-Train is there and not Translucent. And to top it all off, A-Train is like, listen, when you get better, I'm going to come back and teach you how to run as fast as me. And the little boy looks at him like, you're going to teach me how to outrun cancer? That scene is funny. And then we jump to an interesting scene with the Homelander. This is fascinating, right? When you look at the relationship between the Homelander and the director or the head of Vought, I don't know, I can't remember what her name is. Somebody please remind me in the comments. It's really interesting to see their relationship because to me, it's a lesson in psychology. I want to know what you guys think about this. It speaks to the whole notion that if you can control someone psychologically and emotionally, the extent to which you can control them from that vantage point is also the extent to which you can control their behavior. And it doesn't matter about the power difference between the two, because everybody knows that Homelander could snap her neck or burn her eyes out in just a flash. He's much more powerful than she is, but she is able to control him psychologically and emotionally to the extent that she mitigates the threat that he is. And I just find that whole thing fascinating. That's another reason why this show is so interesting, because it takes a whole bunch of different looks at superheroes and who they are in relationship to the people that they're working with and the people in the world and how the dynamics of that relationships work. And the fact that she's able to manipulate him, and we see this a lot is really fascinating because she's so much weaker than he is. So then we see Annie a little bit in this episode as well, and she gets into a little bit of hot water because she helps a girl out that was really about to be raped. She stops that rape, and then they're mad at her for doing so. This is the crazy thing. This is why you got to cover every episode of this, because this is the stuff that we got to talk about, right? It's so crazy that their careers are so highly managed by social media that even if a crime is going on, if it will hurt their ratings as heroes, they are to do nothing. So Vought is not concerned necessarily about what was going to happen to the girl. They're mad that Annie intervened and she didn't have her superhero persona on. She was just in regular clothes. She was Annie, so people would recognize her. Forget the fact that the girl was getting raped. That, to me, is fascinating. And it's also interesting because Annie's just seeing more and more that these people are not who they appear to be. Now, we do know that that whole thing ends up working out because the girl that got raped came forward, and Vought is happy because socially she is boosted in the eyes of the public, and it actually ended up helping her ratings-wise and not hurting her. But that whole outlook is just so twisted. That's another thing that makes this show so interesting. So then if we hop back to what's going on with Translucent and the crew, finally, Frenchie has figured it out. He's looking at the thing and he sees this turtle and he's like, oh snap, I got it. So Frenchie has figured out that you might not be able to hurt him externally, but if you go inside, if you can get to him internally, you can hurt him because his insides are just as vulnerable as ours. And we know that, of course, he plants a cherry bomb, basically, up the rump, and now we know that Translucent is in trouble because Translucent can't dig it out, because if he does, it'll blow up. And of course, if Billy or anybody hits that detonator, it'll blow up as well. Another funny scene from that I thought was hilarious, where he is literally babbling. He goes from super confident to where he's babbling for his life. And that whole thing is hilarious. This is the first time in the show that we actually see a superhero that is vulnerable, and it's really fascinating to see kind of how he switches his whole disposition until he's reading the lips of them who are having a discussion on the outside, because right before they were about to blow him up, Frenchie notices these streaks across the sky, and then they realize, oh snap, it's Homelander. So they have to work to throw him off the scent. So they go to do their thing to throw Homelander off the scent, and they leave Huey and Translucent downstairs by themselves. So Translucent is smart. Basically, the glass is still in the cage. He drank the water. He pees in the cup, throws the cup on the electric. It shorts the cage, and then he's able to walk out. And basically, he tries to talk Huey from not pressing the button. Has this discussion with Huey, and it seems to get to Huey like, listen, Huey, don't do this, man. You need to be able to walk away, return to your life, and that's what you're going to be able to do. Now, he's able, again, to manipulate Huey until Huey sees that poster that says, keep your hands clean. I told you Huey was jacked up. The damage that his dad did to him really has him on some kind of psychosis when he sees certain things that trigger fits of rage in him. So he sees that poster, we see that change on his face, and then you're like, up. Translucent is screwed. And basically, when it looks like Translucent is going to get away, Huey presses that button and boom! Translucent all over the place, including Huey, and that's where that episode ends. The Boys is a really, really fascinating show, and a show that you can talk about, right, like from a lot of different angles. And it's a really interesting show because, as I've said before, one of the things I love about movies and TV shows is that it allows us to kind of enter into a world. So The Boys is cool because it allows us to enter into this world that is very similar to the one that we live in. The only difference is that you have superheroes within that world, and they're not your typical superheroes. They're superheroes that are subject to public opinion, that are enamored by kind of like the bright lights and the fame of being a superhero, that are managed by a company, that have brand deals, that are movie stars. They really are subject to all the trappings that a normal human being would be subject to if they were present in the world. The only difference is they have superpowers. So to see how they operate within this world, to me, makes The Boys really, really fascinating. But the most interesting thing about episode 2 for me really was the insight that we got into Homelander. We really did get a look behind the curtain to see that he's really jacked up in a whole bunch of different ways. I mean, emotionally he's jacked up, and in some ways he's almost like a little boy. We didn't even go over all that we could have gone over concerning Homelander for this episode, but we're definitely going to be keeping our eye on him. Listen, if you've not seen our conversation, if you've not been part of the discussion about episode 1, then you do not want to miss that. I am going there right now, so let's check that out together. And I want to get your feedback about about what you think about that. We're covering every episode of The Boys. So again, join us, you guys. If you're not part of the community, we would love to have you. I will see you on the next episode.